You now know the basics, but let's go in a little bit deeper with some advanced tips and tricks you might want to try out. First off, remember how streaky the blending was here? This happens because the gouache dries so fast. You can always use more water, but that might make too much texture. If you want clean, smooth blending and want to take your time with it, you can add a couple of drops of ox gall to your clear water. It will make the paint blend more smoothly. It increases flow. But the downside, or maybe not the downside depending on your style, is drying time will also increase. So your paint will stay wet longer and you'll have more time to play with it. This is an option if you really like to blend and like to paint slower, like with oil paints. Another thing to keep in mind with gouache is you can easily mix it with other media other than watercolor. You can use all sorts of dry media on top, but I wouldn't recommend wet media. If you want to use wet media that can dry quickly like watercolor, use it first and then gouache. Some fun media to incorporate are colored pencils or ink, but your potential is limitless, so just have fun with it. As you already know, you can also use all sorts of cool techniques that you might know from watercolor painting, like dry brush by using paint straight from the tube for some texture, or making very light washes for backgrounds. If you don't know anything about watercolor, I recommend you learn the medium as well because you can use any technique from it with gouache. So you'll master two mediums in one. Speaking of, if you have watercolor, you can always use it for the first layer in your paintings and then gouache on top, or even do a whole piece in watercolor and then just fix mistakes with gouache. Just be sure not to use watercolor on top of gouache because it is not opaque and won't work on a solid layer. It will just reactivate the paint and add some pigment. So always use it first, or you can even mix your watercolors with gouache to make new ones if you have limited gouache palette. Also, if you use watercolor paper and like to use lots of water with your gouache, you can tape down your paper with artist tape to minimize warping. This is something I usually do. So if your paper warps a lot, keep this in mind. Also, if you plan to paint on something flexible, be sure to keep it flat after you're done to prevent cracking. And if you want to paint a fun surface that's free, you can use cardboard that you were going to recycle anyway. I like to use the pieces that are on the back of my watercolor paper pads. They're very durable and I like the color. As for storing your pieces, the best way to store gouache paintings if you use fugitive colors is in a dark box with a sheet of paper in between them. Or if you want to frame them behind glass so dust and water can't get in. As you know, gouache can easily be scanned or photographed because it's matte. Another benefit to this is you can get fun angles for pictures without any glare. Finally, the most important advanced tip is to learn from as many sources and artists as you can. Study other people's work or watch speed paintings. Collect inspiring pieces on a Pinterest board and study them. If you really like a piece, try copying it. You will learn a lot from doing this about how to use the medium, but just be sure not to share your study copies with anyone else or claim it as your own unless the artist said you can share it if you credit them. Always respect other artists, but there is nothing wrong with copying to learn, as long as you're just doing it to learn and don't share it. In fact, this is one of the best and fastest ways to grow your skills. Now that you got the basics of gouache down, let's see some live examples. Don't be shy, grab your brushes and paint and follow along with me to learn the most. But if you don't want to, you can just watch and then do your own thing with the same techniques. But be sure to get your hands dirty, paint something no matter what, so that you will remember everything you learn and will incorporate it and actually grow your skills.